What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we're going to go over my running back rankings and tier list for week 17 of the fantasy football season. It is pretty much it. We are in championship week. This is going to be our last week of rankings, waiver wire, all that good stuff. We're still going to do top 10 lessons learned because I think there's still going to be some actionable stuff in terms of dynasty and, rookies performing in the playoffs and just kind of maybe even free agency or head coaching stuff, all that good stuff and more. But then we're going to start cranking up like dynasty content, maybe even do a little bit of Madden content. Been thinking about that kind of stuff. So we'll see what the offseason has to hold. But let's get into my running back rankings. We're going to talk some matchups, all that good stuff and more. Make sure you're subscribed if you're new. Leave a like. Let's not waste any more time. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm critical. My nitty bag.
All right, fellas, let me get us into the magic screen. We'll kind of see. I'll kind of mess around with my screen size here. I don't know if I want to be bigger. I feel like this is probably a good size, just to get this beautiful blue-eyed face with a fucked up haircut. Also, you guys want to update on the haircut? This is what we got going on here. You ready? It's looking a little bit rough. Now, of course, it wasn't a hat, so that's why things are sticking up. But this is where we're at, fellas. This is genuinely where we're at. Probably like 3 weeks out from me being able to go back to like just a barbershop, get a haircut, and be fine. So we're doing all right. Still in a rough in between phase. So we will be, repping the hat a little bit. It's not really. I don't really care. It's honestly just easier to put something on it than to try and make something work out of what we got going on. But anyways, RB1, the only running back in S tier, the king himself. I don't care if you think that the king is Derrick Henry. My king is Jonathan Taylor. And I know that it might not seem like he should be there, right? He did put up a dud, and I felt that. All of my best teams were Jonathan Taylor teams. Only one of my Jonathan Taylor teams made it to the finals, and he put up a dud. A dud for Jonathan Taylor. That's the crazy part. 27 carries for 108 yards is, by Jonathan Taylor's standards, a dud. And just in PPR and standard leagues, or not even standard, just PPR leagues, 10.8 points for 27 carries for 108 yards just sucks. I put out a tweet that surprisingly got like some engagement from it, but it sucks, man. He had a 100-yard rushing game. They played amazing. Who did they play? The Cardinals. They won that game. The Colts are really freaking good, man. But it just wasn't enough. But I will say, I'm not, the reason why he's in S tier is I don't care a ton about the dud last week. He still had 27 carries for 108 yards. And I don't care that much about the receptions thing. He hasn't had a reception in the last 3 games. People are mentioning that, but he saw 2 targets last week. I think that one of them went over his head. He's had 27 or more attempts in his last 3 games, so he's making up for it with a lot of rushing volume. And on top of that, he's still running around the same amount of routes that he's been running all season long. They just haven't been connecting in terms of him earning targets or Carson Wentz just hitting him where he needs to be hit. Now, into this week, we have Las Vegas. They're going to be at home against Las Vegas. They should be pretty good favorites here. Now, I couldn't even get a line on this game, right, to see how much they're favored by, because the Carson Wentz injury has a lot of things up in the air. Or not injury. He's on the COVID list. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have read over the COVID stuff, and I still don't understand. I can't wrap my head around it. I still don't really know what's going on. Carson Wentz has COVID. There's a chance that he only needs to be on the list for 5 days and then could play on Sunday. Again, I read it. I'm an idiot. I couldn't tell you at this point. Things are changing all the time. Carson Wentz, as of right now, I would say 70% chance he plays. Maybe I'm being too nice. Regardless, even if Wentz doesn't play, yes, the offense will be a little bit anemic, right? It won't be that great, but it'll just be all concentrated on Jonathan Taylor. They still need to win games out here. They don't have the division locked up, and Las Vegas allows the 8th most running back points in the league. So it's a really soft matchup. I think regardless, they lean on Jonathan Taylor, even if they have to play with Sam Ehlinger in the backfield. Load up the boxes all you want against Jonathan Taylor. I really don't care. That's why I have him in S tier. He is matchup-proof, quarterback-proof, whatever you want to throw at him. I don't care a ton. Next, we have A tier, and these are still, top dog running backs, just not guys I would put in the tier of Jonathan Taylor, of the consistency of him just having the ability to go off for 30 to 40 points in a given week. But I really do like Nick Chubb this week. He's playing in Pittsburgh, and I love this matchup because He just went out last week, had a great day, had over 100 plus scrimmage yards against the Packers. And of course, Kareem Hunt's going to be out, and Nick Chubb hasn't been a huge part of the passing game, but a little bit more involved. He's been a little bit more involved in the passing game than, I'm not going to say years past, but just as of late. He had 4 targets for 58 yards last week, and they're drawing up plays for him, whether that's in the screen or just like halfback swing type stuff. He is a little bit more of a focal point in the passing game. I don't know if that's because, Odell Beckham is gone and they have all their problems where like they have to start featuring, Anthony Schwartz and Donovan Peoples-Jones as like focal points of their passing game. It would make sense. Nick Chubb, you can say that he's a limited pass catcher all you want. Regardless, just like Jonathan Taylor, he is the best playmaker on that team. It is in the Browns' best interest when you are giving targets to guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones and Anthony Schwartz. And you can say whatever you want about them, but if a majority of your targets are going to guys like that, then you should be, making exceptions in the passing game for Nick Chubb. And I think that that's what they've been going to. It's been working for them a little bit. And the Pittsburgh run defense, like Pittsburgh, in our head, right, when we close our eyes and we think about this, I'm also going to talk about this in the offseason of just like, there's a lot of like preconceived notions we have, right? When we think about Cooper Kupp in the offseason, we think white slot wide receiver, no upside. We're seeing Julian Edelman, we're seeing Wes Welker, instead of just kind of looking at what the numbers are telling us and going from there, right? With the Steelers, they don't have as good a defense as they've had in years past, and they're allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Dalvin Cook ran wild on this team a few weeks ago. Nick Chubb is going to run wild on this Pittsburgh team. He's going to have, that's why I have him at RB2. I see pretty much locked and loaded like 18 plus points this week. Then at RB3, we have Austin Ekeler. And this one I'm a little bit less sure about. He's going to be healthy this week, or he should be healthy this week off of COVID. He had a limited workload the week before, so it's kind of good that he had a COVID week so he could kind of get back up to speed. He should have, a normal workload. He's also in a must-win game for the Chargers after losing to the Texans, which was just absolutely wild. And Denver is bottom 10 in rush defense DVOA. So it's a lighter matchup. It's a must-win game. I expect Ekeler to be featured in this game. And, of course, he's always efficient. He's always going to be explosive. So he's a great start this week. And at RB4, we have Dalvin Cook. He's going to be in Green Bay. And I know that he missed time last week. He should be healthy this week. Green Bay has the 2nd worst rush defense per DVOA. And it should just be a classic Dalvin Cook, 20 for like 90 and a touchdown type game. It feels like that kind of game. I also like Dalvin Cook as he is one of the few running backs where you have Dalvin Cook, you have Jonathan Taylor, any of these guys in SNA tier. The reason why they're in SNA tier is they have the potential to be the hammers in these league playoffs, right? The guy like last year where we had Alvin Kamara have 6 touchdowns in that final matchup. I think Dalvin Cook, Ekeler, Chubb, JT, all the potential to be that guy that you needed to have to win this year in the finals. Then the next tier of guys I don't see quite having that type of potential, but still strong RB1 options. And we're going to start with Joe Mixon. And he actually had a really good week last week. Kind of, I wouldn't call it a role change, but something to keep your eye on because he logged his most snaps since week 2 with 82% of the snaps. And he also tied for his season high in targets with 6. And he didn't even have a crazy rushing day, but he had enough receiving upside that he had 31.5 PPR points this week. And it was a really positive bright spot for Joe Mixon. I don't understand why. And we talked about this on Top 10 Lessons Learned. Zach Taylor is so annoying for this offense because I think that this is going to go over a lot of people's heads, but we talked about it. They're 22nd in pass attempts per game, which is insane given the offensive line that they have and all the pass catching options that they have, why they wouldn't just air the ball out constantly. I would be running exactly what the Buffalo Bills are doing, what the Chiefs are doing. I would be trying to have a pass attempts per game in the top 5, neutral pass rate in the top 5. I would want to just crank everything up, let Joe Burrow cook, and then on top of that, you open everything up, you make them spread things out for T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and then boom, you get Mixon up the middle, and you're good to go. He also likes to prefer P. Ryan to Mixon in the passing game, which we've said a million times makes no sense, because at Oklahoma, Mixon was the pass catcher guy who would even split out and play wide receiver, and Samaje P. Ryan was the between the tackles bruiser. Makes no sense. This game, Mixon got a little bit of a this game against the Ravens. I know that you can say like, oh, the secondary was banged up or whatever. This outlines just kind of the potential of this team if they just tweak their tendencies to their strengths, right? They passed the ball a ton, even in a blowout, and they had Mixon as their pass catching back more than P. Ryan. It was one of his highest routes run totals of the season, and it showed. Mixon is a really good pass-catching running back. I don't understand why he's used any differently than that. Now, that's my Joe Mixon rant for the day. Regardless, I love this matchup. He's going to be at home against Kansas City. This matchup could be... I know I'm someone that exaggerates a lot, but I keep on just hoping and praying that we get a Los Angeles Rams versus Chiefs type blowout that we had. And I know that that's going to be like a once every like 5 to 10 years type game where it's like 54-51, right? Like over 100 points scored in the game. If there was a week for that to happen, I mean, Chiefs versus Bengals when they're both really cooking here could happen. Now, obviously, they have the second highest over under the slate, 49.5, but obviously when I say things like that, it ends up being, you get two high-powered offenses, and then sometimes it just becomes a, war of attrition, like 21-13. So we'll see what happens, but it's a game I want to be attacking because it has tons of, firework-type shootout potential. Then we have Ronald Jones. And last week, he didn't pop like crazy. He only had, I want to say, like 16 points, but he had a lot of volume. He had 20 carries, he had 3 targets, and he turned those 20 carries into 65 yards and a touchdown. He needs to be a little bit more efficient than that for the Buccaneers to trust him as their lead guy, but I don't see them handing over any of the reins to Keyshawn Vaughn. Now, Keyshawn Vaughn did have that long touchdown, and that could give some problems to Ronald Jones, but I just don't see how Ronald Jones doesn't run well against the Jets, right? He's going to be in New York. They're 13-point favorites. The Jets allow the most fantasy points to opposing running backs. They're like bottom 5 in rush defense per DVOA. Ronald Jones should run absolutely wild on those boys. I expect, 20 carries, 80-plus yards, a touchdown or 2. Then at RB7, we have Najee Harris. And he had a decent week last week, right? He put up 16 points. He is just someone you can kind of lock in for 13 to 18 points. He's going to be playing at home against Cleveland. That's pretty much a neutral matchup. The Browns aren't amazing against the run, but they're also not soft against the run, right? It's just a fine matchup. Najee Harris is a high floor play, so we'll put him in at RB7. Then at RB8, we have David Montgomery. And we talked about this as a guy that could be a potential hammer this year in the playoffs, just like last year. And David Montgomery is the embodiment of just, I don't even know what to call it, but just, I guess, volume over efficiency. He had 21 carries for 45 yards and a touchdown last week. He had 9 targets, 7 catches, 61 yards for 23.6 points. He had 30 opportunities, and he turned that into only 106 yards. I mean, that's tough. That's really tough for David Montgomery, but they have no one else to turn to. I mean, Khalil Herbert is really explosive, but they wouldn't. And this volume it's not just volume, but it's really valuable volume. One of the best stats out there, I think Ben Gretsch kind of came up with it, but high value touches, right? So that's going to be touches inside of the 10-yard line and receptions, because those are the two most important things. We want running backs that get high value touches. Those are all that really matter. And he's leading the league in high value touches per game since week 13 with 9.5. The next guy, like second place, is like 7.3. So he's getting all the valuable touches. He's getting all the volume in the world. He has a really, really juicy matchup at home against the Giants this week, who are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. I love him as a mid-range to firm RB1. Then our last running back in this tier, and I think you can even argue to move him down a tier, but things are kind of trending up for Aaron Jones. I think that he, from a usage perspective, it's worth highlighting Aaron Jones because he's taken back the reins of being the lead running back. I kind of do wonder if why he split with A.J. Dillon is still because he was working back from injury. I love A.J. Dillon. You guys know I've made multiple videos on him, but Aaron Jones now has a better grip on the rush attempts and the targets. He had his most rush attempts and most targets since before his injury. He had more rush attempts and targets than A.J. Dillon. He's now back into his, 1A or, kind of lead back to change of pace, with A.J. Dillon being the change of pace back type of, idea going on here. And he's going to be at home against Minnesota, who's allowing the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. So it's a nice matchup. Aaron Jones is always explosive. He's always, kind of getting into the end zone. So I like him as RB9 this week, and that might even be too low now that I kind of work it out in my head. Then we have our RB10, Sony Michel, who is like really having himself a little resurgence here. Kind of reminds me of Leonard Fournette. Shout out to Jacob Sanderson for that, kind of parallel where he was a first-round pick. He looked good in year 1. He won the Super Bowl. kind of has fallen off since, but he's still, he was a first-round pick. He's looked good, and he is essentially getting the usage of early season Darrell Henderson. Remember, early season Darrell Henderson was getting all the snaps, all the usage. Sony Michel had 90% of the snaps, 20% of the carries, and he's now going to be in Baltimore in pretty much a neutral matchup. But again, he's going to be getting all the volume on a team that scores a lot of points. So Sony Michel, top 10 running back this week. Then we have Ezekiel Elliott, who you guys know I'm not a huge fan of Ezekiel Elliott, but this week, he's going to be playing at home against Arizona, and that is the matchup of the week, right? We have the Chiefs, Bengals, and then we have Cowboys versus Arizona. And Arizona is tough against the run, but it's a great environment in terms of scoring, right? So the over-under is 51.5. That's 2 points higher than the Chiefs versus Bengals, and it's the highest over-under of the slate. So you kind of just want guys that can score touchdowns there. I think Ezekiel Elliott is good for maybe 18 touches, 55 total yards, and 2 touchdowns is in his wheelhouse. So that's a fine start. You're just kind of preying on touchdowns there. Then we have Alvin Kamara, who feels like he doesn't belong here, right? RB12, maybe he should be in here, maybe he should be in here. I'm kind of souring on Kamara in terms of, not just in terms of weekly, but in terms of redraft, overall, in terms of dynasty, in terms of next year for seasonal. It's tough to bet on Alvin Kamara. This is a rough situation where they're trotting out guys like Ian Book, and he now has back-to-back games with under 8 points. He also has had back-to-back games with his lowest snap share of the season, giving up a lot of snaps, a lot of touches to Mark Ingram, and he's just tough to trust now. But on the bright side, he's playing against Carolina at home, and they're allowing the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and the reason why you still need to respect Alvin Kamara and put him at least in C tier. If you want to put him in the head of C tier, fine. If you want to even put him somewhere in here, fine. The reason why Alvin Kamara isn't, down here, because he's Alvin Kamara. You have to respect the upside. You have to respect the 6 touchdown game he had last year. That's always in his range of outcomes, is doing something stupid and just putting up 35 points. So as much as I want to count out Alvin Kamara, he has to be in C tier. Then we have Darrell Williams, who gets a huge bump with CEH not there. He's going to be playing again in that Chiefs versus Bengals game that I really like, the highest over-under of the slate, or second highest over-under of the slate at 49.5. It's a neutral matchup in terms of defense. The Bengals aren't really amazing or bad in terms of stopping the run, but Darrell Williams should get all the volume in the world on a really high-scoring offense in a really good game environment, so I like him at RB13. Then we have Damien Harris, who had 18 carries, 103 yards, and 3 touchdowns last week. He's very touchdown dependent. I don't think he had a single target or reception in that game. The thing is that that's okay in this matchup at home against the Jaguars. They are 15.5 point favorites. They should run all over the Jaguars, and he could get another 3 touchdown game. So I like him as a top. I have him at RB14 there. Then we have Josh Jacobs, who's going to be playing in Indianapolis, which is a tough matchup, but just given, his RB2 type volume, he had 27 carries last week. He should be a fine RB2. Then we have Antonio Gibson at RB16. And he had a weird game last week. You had the Cowboys absolutely kill Washington. It's hard to really analyze any of what happened in that game. You can kind of just throw everything out. But Antonio Gibson gets a matchup this week at home against the Eagles. Pretty much a neutral matchup, but I expect him to be, again, in that RB2 range. Nothing really too crazy about the matchup, but Antonio Gibson always has, between the tackles, touchdown type upside. Also with J.D. McKissick on IR, I believe. He's a fine start. Then we have Javonte Williams, who you could make the case to even put him at the high end of D tier. I'll just say, just because Melvin Gordon's been still mixing in and being annoying, that I'll put him at RB17, but I'm kind of throwing away last week where he didn't play very well, but neither did anybody on that offense play well. It was the lowest amount of offensive plays in a single game this year. They only had 40 offensive plays with Drew Lock, which resulted in 15 rush attempts. Not enough for 2 running backs, but as long as everything goes normally, they should be fine, and they're going to be playing in Los Angeles against the Chargers, and that should be a really easy matchup as a team that is allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Next, we have Rashaad Penny at RB18 in the next tier. And these are still guys that are good, but again, we're dealing with Rashaad Penny, who's a free agent pickup not somebody like Rashaad Penny. Great, right? He's my RB18. He's just not somebody I'd put in this tier yet. I will say, though, he's been an absolute god. 17 carries, 135 yards, and a touchdown last week. He leads the league in rushing yards the last 3 games. He looks great. 10 or more rush attempts in his last 4. And Detroit allows the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. He's going to be playing at home against Detroit. Really, really juicy stuff here for Rashaad Penny. Then we have Devin Singletary, who I'll say I have a little bit of a tough time trusting. I think we're actually going to move him. We're going to move him to the end of this tier. So hold that thought on Devin Singletary. We're actually going to put Chase Edmonds in here. And I'll say Chase Edmonds is a weird one for me to rank. He's going to be at RB19 for me as of right now until I get a little bit more clarity on the James Conner injury. He went crazy without James Conner last week. Super high over-under, Dallas versus the Cardinals. Really, really good spot for Chase Edmonds. If James Conner does not play, you can put Chase Edmonds all the way into, this range right here. But I'm just going to tentatively put him in E tier. Then our next running back is going to be Michael Carter, who played really well last week. He handled over 70% of the snaps. He had most of the passing down work. And the biggest takeaway from that game is Ty Johnson almost played no snaps. So it went from a rotational backfield of, 3. So it was Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman, and Michael Carter, which is tough, right? When there's 3 backs in the backfield, it's tough to really get especially on the Jets when you're not running a ton of plays or scoring a bunch of points. You need that to be a 2-back rotation. With Ty Johnson kind of getting that bump down, that relegation, if you will, opens up a lot of things for Michael Carter. It's going to be a tough matchup this week. They're at home against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But it is a matchup that is good for Michael Carter as a pass-catching back, the guy who handles all the 2-minute drill stuff, all the long down and distance stuff. He will, he is in range for a, 8+ reception game, which is great in PPR leagues. Then we'll talk about Devin Singletary. I'll have him at the end of this tier. And the reason I don't feel great about this is because they activated Zach Moss. And I know that he didn't do anything amazing. I think that he kind of looked decent at the end of the game. And when Zach Moss is healthy, it scares me a little bit because you could just, like, the Bills have had no allegiance to any lead running back. They had Zach Moss early in the season, right? They healthy scratched Zach Moss. Then he was the lead back. Then Devin Singletary was the lead back. Then Matt Breida was the lead back. Then Devin Singletary was the lead back. They just kind of go, round and round and round. And in a championship game, it sucks you have to kind of bet on Devin Singletary because they could easily just say, you know what, we're going to roll with Zach Moss this week. He looked good in practice. But at the end of the day, Devin Singletary now has 3 straight top 14 finishes. He gets a light matchup against Atlanta at home, who are as a 14.5-point favorite at home. And Atlanta allows the 12th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So really juicy matchup. It really just comes down to how much usage he gets comparatively to Zach Moss. On to F tier, we have Cordell Patterson, and this tier is just ugly, man. I really don't know what to say about this tier. If you want to put 3 other running backs in this tier, I wouldn't even be mad about it, but we're going to put Cordell Patterson in here. His role is shrinking, which is the really tough part. He only had 9 opportunities last week. I think he had like his least amount of opportunities in a while. And on the flip side, with Cordell Patterson, the only reason why I have a little bit of optimism with him is that he's always been someone that won on efficiency, not on volume anyways. So the volume is shrinking, but his efficiency also hasn't been there. He had 0%. He had 0 explosive runs in his last 2 games. He's been someone that has been really explosive, has been ripping off long runs, scoring touchdowns. So you can just kind of bet on him and hope that the efficiency kind of swings back the other way. Maybe that earns him more targets in this game. So he does have monster upside to, he's someone that just finds the end zone, finds long runs, and he's going to be playing at Buffalo. So it's not a great matchup on paper, but surprisingly, the Bills allow the 9th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So I don't hate Cordell Patterson at all this week. Then we have Melvin Gordon. Again, Chargers allow the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. You can throw out whatever happened last week. I think that Melvin Gordon and Javonte are set up pretty decent here. Then we have a very sad one at RB24, Saquon Barkley, which is tough because the guy is almost unstartable. When I sit down and make these rankings on Thursday, I might even move him farther down the list. He was outsnapped by Devontae Booker last week. I think that they're kind of, they're out of the playoffs. They're probably ramping him down. Let's just get him healthy for next year. So it is hard to trust him. The only thing is that he's still Saquon. He can still rip off an explosive play. He can still, catch a straight touchdown. And the Bears aren't a great matchup. He's going to be in Chicago. The Bears they're not a bad matchup. He's going to be in Chicago against the Bears, who are allowing the 11th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. So It's a juicy matchup and situation. It just comes down to how much volume Saquon Barkley will ultimately see at the end of the day. Now, that is going to do it for us today, fellas. I'm going to go eat some lunch. As always, I love you guys. Subscribe if you're new. Leave a like. I'm going to go eat some lunch. I'm going to go do the outline for the wide receiver rankings that you guys will see tomorrow. As always, I will see you guys in the next one.
I got the juice, I got the juice.
Channel, Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper song, singer, suspended, subpoena from Mr. Meaner.